The biggest moment of a shattering worldview is that we had our first son, and 3 years after that, we were going to have our second son, and my second son was born very early. So my wife had preeclampsia, and they had to deliver my son at only 25 weeks gestation. Normal gestational period is 40 weeks, so that was 15 weeks early. And my wife's life was on the line. There was no choice. And he survived the birth, and he lived in the NICU for about a month, and he got an infection and he died. So, my son Avery, he passed away in 2018, and he had only lived in the hospital, right? And we had only seen him in the hospital, and I didn't even get a chance to hold him in life because he was always on a ventilator or something. Emily got to hold him once. And that, losing a child, I feel like until that moment, even though I had had challenges in life, I had lived a really charmed life. Like, I was just lucky, and I had not really suffered much at all. I mean, I had depression in college. I had stressful times, got bullied a little bit in school, but to know that kind of suffering, I hadn't really. I feel like you're a different person when something like that happens to you, and you live in a different world. There are more people living in that world with you than you realize, because people don't often talk about this.
Yeah.
It's hard, and it's just like even a simple question that someone could ask me when we first meet. How many kids do you have? That becomes a complicated answer. Do I say I have 2 kids and not mention him? That doesn't feel good, because he's one of my children, he lived, his life matters. But do I want to get into that heavy of a topic with somebody that I just met?
Right.
I'll do it different ways, right? I might say, I usually am open with it, right? I'm more of a wear your heart on your sleeve kind of guy. And I want him to be acknowledged, so I'll just say, I got 2 kids at home and 1 that passed away. Or if I don't want to get into it, 2 kids at home. That's a way of saying that. That's not saying that I only have 2 kids, but I have 2 kids that are at home with me right now. And if they want to inquire into it more, I'll get into it. But I've connected with even the guy who sold me my car, He asked me that question, and I told him. And he shared with me a very similar story, that he had a very devastating loss. And you can intellectually understand mortality and impermanence, but when it really hits you in life, it changes your perspective.
I've shared some things with you as well in that same vein, and I think just having the outlet for it is such a relief to have someone that you feel you can talk to. And it doesn't make the pain better, but sharing it somehow makes it easier to carry, and it just gives you an opportunity to talk out loud through what you're feeling. And I think the biggest thing is it really allows you to process it yourself in a way that you can't if it just stays in your head. Does that make sense? It's kind of like talking through a lot of problems. If you're just talking out loud, and I think this is a problem that men run into a lot when your wife or your girlfriend is telling you her problems, our minds are spinning on how do I fix it and thinking about that. They don't necessarily need that. Them telling us about their problems is them walking themselves through it and mostly fixing it themselves by the time they get done. And we miss that.
I want someone to be there to understand their feelings.
Yeah. And I don't think we realize that we need that, right? Until
Yeah.
a situation like this, and it's like, oh shit, that is exactly what's happening.
Yeah. And that is one of those situations where you can't fix it. There's no fixing it.
Right.
Right? So that can make it very hard for especially a masculine guy who always wants to fix the problems, right? You can't fix it, so you have to learn another way of being. And unfortunately, the way a lot of people deal with not knowing how to support someone who's been through a loss is they don't talk about it. They avoid the person because they don't know what to say. And unfortunately, that's the worst thing that you could actually do. That person does not want to feel isolated. Almost anything you could do would be better than not saying anything. When someone has lost someone, you can't remind them. They didn't forget. Right?
Right.
And even though I've lost a child, I still sometimes fall into that. I know someone who lost her husband, and I'm like, oh, I shouldn't mention her husband. Wait a minute. Do you think she forgot that her husband died? And I'm going to remind her? No. being there for people is important in whatever way you can. And I hope that when in the future I know people around me will lose people because people die. And I hope I am better prepared to support them through their grief because I've been through it. And because I've used my mindfulness practice to help me get through it, I hope that I'm prepared to help people that might be interested in learning how mindfulness can help them work through those feelings. When something like this happens to you, the phrase "everything happens for a reason" is not something you want to hear, because there's no good reason for a baby to die, right? It's not some greater purpose or whatever, but we do make meaning. I hope that one of the things that I got out of this is now I have an experience of this grief and this suffering, and I can connect with other people on that level. And it's not that I wouldn't go back in time and change it if I could and have him live, but it's something that I can say is a positive that I was able to pull out of the suffering and the tragedy.
To put that spin on it, man, that's unbelievable. And thank you for sharing that, because I would not have thought of that without you saying it. So I think that's critically important for anybody who is going through that, to not immediately, but as you have time to process and unpack it, look for something you can take from it to give, because that extends the legacy of the person you lost as well.
Yeah, I would never say that to someone right after that happened, like, look at the good of this. No way. But, you yourself might find something over time. Part of it is empathy and realizing the truth that everybody suffers. And that leads to compassion, which is the earnest desire to relieve suffering.